on the NewsChannel 5 network. This is OpenLine.
Hello everyone, welcome to OpenLine. Fascinating topic tonight, one I have never before done on OpenLine. We're talking about exorcisms, and let's just delve into it. Let's talk about this, get a better understanding of it, ask any question you may have had about this topic, and we're very happy to have with us Father Ed Steiner, Senior Priest and Rector at the Cathedral of the Incarnation, the beautiful church there on West End. Mm-hmm. Father, thank you for coming on.
Oh, happy to do this.
Thanks for coming on tonight, talking about this. I have a lot of questions.
Sure.
Let's start big picture. The Catholic Church, the official position on exorcisms is what?
That the devil is real, and that evil can possess a person. The Church would say, not against your will, you have to cooperate with evil to be possessed. Unlike some of the movies, I mean, you've got to invite evil in one way, shape, or form. Of course, we call Satan, the word means tempter, so sometimes evil sort of tempts you its way, but we certainly believe in evil, believe in Satan personified. We believe that people can be possessed, and then consequently, we've had a long history of this ritual that we call an exorcism to help people that feel like or might in fact be possessed.
You have studied the process from the Church's perspective. What does that mean? Have you been to Rome to study this, or how have you studied this process?
In recent years, there was just, especially when I was a pastor up in Clarksville, Tennessee, I was getting a lot of requests for exorcisms, and I really didn't know a whole heck of a lot about it beyond my seminary studies, so I just jumped into it with both feet. Reading the ritual, reading the studies, reading the professional literature about it, so I've just become really very familiar with it.
And how do you do that? What is the process to become familiar with it?
There's actually a lot of literature about it, both Catholic and non-Catholic. Most of our mainline Protestant churches, the sacramental churches, have some form of exorcism rituals. It's also known in other religions, Buddhism, other ancient religions. So it's we've all sort of got versions of it. So there's a lot of literature out there. You may have to go to a divinity library to find some of it, but there's also a lot of stuff online. A person can Google Catholic exorcism ritual, and there it is. They can read the whole ritual. So
have you done one of these? Have you done an exorcism?
A formal exorcism, no. And they're really, quite frankly, they're very rare. There are three types of exorcisms. One is we do an exorcism at baptism, and any priest or deacon that's baptizing a person, child or adult, does an exorcism prayer, but we're not casting something out. I always make the joke, say, look, I'm going to do this exorcism prayer, and if anything comes out of that child, don't get between me and the door. I'm going to hurt you.
Right.
But it's a prayer asking that God will set the person we're baptizing, that God will set them free from the effects of original sin. So, and that's a type of exorcism, asking for freedom from something. And then there is what we also call minor exorcisms, which essentially are blessings. Like I said, when I was up in Clarksville, I got a lot of calls for exorcism. People thought there was something in their house, and typically what we would do, we would go and do a home blessing. And an exorcism, not only can you do an exorcism to, say, cast something out, you can also do it for protection from something. And so that's essentially what the blessing prayers do. And then the third kind of exorcism is the sure enough formal exorcism. You do have to be formally trained. You do have to go to Rome for those studies. You have to gain all kinds of approval, to become an official exorcist of the church. Typically, most dioceses will have one, and that's about it. And then there's other exorcists that belong to what we call order. They're order priests. They belong like to the Dominicans or the Benedictines or the Franciscans, one of those kinds of groups. And they may have guys that they can send out as well.
So, all right, there are three kinds.
Right.
One involves, let's say, a house. Somebody's concerned that there's
it's haunted or
something in their
inhabited.
house.
Right.
Have you done one of those?
Yes.
And so you've gone to a house. Did you see evidence that what they were saying was happening or was real? Or I guess you walked in, and what did you encounter?
Usually I meet with a person first. I have them come by the church, and we talk about what seems to be happening. And I approach it with, in terms of a real haunting or presence or something, I approach it with a huge amount of skepticism, although I don't act like that with the person. I mean, I take what they're telling me very seriously. And then after we sort of establish what's going on, then I'll go to the house and walk, it's the same blessing whether somebody moves into a new house and say, Father, why don't you bless our house to protect it against bad things, to protect all the occupants. This is pretty much the same thing, although there's some little prayers that are slightly different that you can use in situations. So in this particular case, there are prayers for protection, and they involve just prayers, reading a scripture, and you walk around to every room and sprinkle a little holy water in all the rooms and finish with a final blessing and say, there you go.
And this gives people great comfort.
It does. It does. And here's the interesting thing. The vast majority of those that I've done are not Catholics, but they're non-Catholics.
Huh.
And in the vast majority of those, they're whatever denomination, their minister said, you need to call a Catholic priest. So I always get kind of tickled, if you got devil problems, call a priest.
So that's the one where there's a structure.
Correct.
Then there's the individual.
Right.
We've seen all this, portrayed in movies and that kind of thing, but have you done an exorcism like that? Have you been a part of something like that? Not
a formal exorcism on a person, because I'm not trained, so I can't. B, if you're going to do a true exorcism, after all the studies are done and there's a process by which that people go, that is utilized, then if they pass the gauntlet, then they get the real exorcism, and then the real guy comes in. Now, I have had on occasion, rarely, but I have had on occasion on a more serious level where a psychologist or psychiatrist is called and said, I have a patient, I really don't think they're possessed, but they do. It's probably schizophrenia, it's probably this, a dissociative disorder or something. And they said, therapeutically, they're so convinced they're possessed that therapeutically I think it would be helpful if I could bring them by and you talk to them and then do something. Now, of course, a lot of times that psychologist, psychiatrist, they don't know what that something is. Mm-hmm. And really and truly, it doesn't amount much more. I pull out my ritual for the sick, that we use if a person's physically ill, because some of those prayers are just absolutely perfect and beautiful, and it tends to make the person a little happier. Now, do they walk out of there feeling like something was cast out? Nah, maybe not. They need to do a lot more therapy. But yeah, I've done that kind of thing before. Or somebody thinks something's going on in their lives, think that some family members are having problems. And yeah, then I'll do those minor exorcisms, prayers, either out of a ritual book or ones that, some spontaneous prayer that just seems appropriate for the moment.
And in reading about this, the concern that some have is that it's not evil, that it's mental illness.
Right.
And so how do you differentiate that? How do you get into that issue? Are we talking about mental illness here, or are we talking about actual evil?
If a person comes forward, is brought forward or comes forward claiming possession, and the priest that might talk to them initially, or even a counselor, think, there is something more to this than we're getting at the moment. Well, then they enter into a process, and a man that I met just recently, a priest, is a sure enough exorcism, and I had a lot of fun talking to him. He was an MD before he became a priest, and he's become very fascinated by this whole line of work. And we had some great conversations in the evening, television kind of turned down low. But he described to me that when they're called, he's in South Carolina, and when he's called about an exorcism, he has a whole team. It's made up of a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a social worker, mental, a neurologist, other types of physicians. It is a huge professional team. And the person has to really kind of, I'm going to say, run the gauntlet, but but in a very kind and helpful and therapeutic way. They're going to all these people and things are being sorted out. And he said, no one gets to him until they've gone through that process, and the process says, we need to send them to the priest. And he said in all the years, the vast majority, with the exception of 3 separate occasions, the person started showing improvement and getting better even before it got to the priest. But he said that over time, he's had 3 in his lifetime, come to him. And he said it just got to the point where all of these mental health professionals, everybody involved, said, we cannot explain this. And there's actually some criteria that there's 5 points of criteria that have to be met. And the criteria are that is the individual, is that all of a sudden are they speaking in languages, sure enough languages, but languages that they've never had an encounter with. Like all of a sudden is somebody speaking in Bantu or Swahili or something,
right,
and has never demonstrated any contact with that. But now they are speaking it, now they understand it. Does the person seem to have knowledge or demonstrate knowledge of events that they have no earthly way of knowing about? Things, for example, if I came in to do an exorcism on you and you started talking to me about some of my childhood sins and we just met, how do you know that? My mother doesn't know that.
Right.
But how do they, do they have kind of, let's use a term, sort of some supernatural knowledge? Or do they have knowledge of the future events that over time they were right? The next criteria is some kind of supernatural human strength that is not explained by being on drugs or not explained by adrenaline rushes, that even in point of view of the physics of the body, if you or I were to do something they did, would break a bone, but they didn't. And then the last piece of criteria, does the person show a true aversion to discussion of God, to a discussion of the Blessed Mother, to a cross or crucifix or any other sacred object? And there's some of the case studies that I have been able to get hold of and read. When they apply these criteria, there's been individuals that they've, they got to the formal thing and they've, they put water on them, leading the individual to believe that it's holy water, and the individual had no reaction. And then at another time, they'll use real holy water, and the individual has no clue. It's like a blind study in medicine. One of them's a placebo, one of them's a real deal. And they'll react to the real one, but they won't react to the fake one. And that's...
My goodness, that's fascinating. And so you personally have not encountered that.
No.
But someone that you have talked to and respect and believe has encountered that.
Yes.
And so your personal opinion is that's real.
Absolutely.
So that's pretty scary.
It is. It is. And a good priest friend of mine, he's received a couple of phone calls about going to do an exorcism, and he has the same line: homie, don't do no exorcisms. Homie, don't do no Ghostbusters. I don't do Ghostbusters. So, I mean, he believes it deeply enough that, no, he wants somebody that's a little more trained and a little more. And then there's a ritual that the priest who's going to do the exorcism has to go through. Before he goes to do the exorcism, he must first go to confession. Then he must celebrate Mass. Then he must spend time in private prayer, significant time in private prayer, and then and only then is he ready to get up, leave the house, or go wherever to, to be with the person. And there always has to be other people present. It's never just one-on-one. He said that they always have a physician on hand, we have a psychiatrist on hand, and family members, because when you start going through the ritual, there's a lot of prayers that people have to respond to. So, you got to have people there to make the responses.
And what impact does that have on his life to have witnessed that and to truly believe that he was in the presence of that kind of evil? I mean, how does that impact his life and I guess your life through him? But I mean, how does that impact, how should it impact our lives?
Well, he says, like anybody that faces trauma of any kind, of course this is a little bit different than most kinds of trauma, but I mean, people witness evil things a lot, shootings and stabbings and, bad things. But he voluntarily puts himself in a little bit of therapy, and then he also goes for spiritual direction to another priest. And he said that that's sort of de rigueur. I mean, that's just sort of expected, because you got to keep your own head on straight after you witness something like that.
Did you ask, I mean, in those cases, do you remove the bad presence? I mean, is the person one moment in this bad state and the next, do they get better? Or what happens a year later?
He said that it's, in the 3 he's done, it's never been this dramatic thing like on The Exorcist, where all of a sudden all of the color returns to normal and the person is just nice and loving. But it's clear they're absolutely at peace and relieved. And always there's follow-up therapy afterwards, psychotherapy or something afterwards. So the person is returned to life, but they themselves have been through a trauma. And so they really do have to do some therapy afterwards, to kind of get their life back together. They probably hurt some people's feelings, if not outright hurt people. They probably created mayhem, wherever. So they've got to deal with those things.
This is not the kind of thing somebody could fake.
No. I did have a psychologist call me once. She had a client, again, that the client was convinced she was possessed and had an aversion to, she couldn't even walk on the sidewalk past a church. So we did these little exercises, get her walk by, and we slowly walked her into the church. But in watching her behavior, she reacted sort of the right ways to all the stimuli, but it became apparent to me that she's not possessed. She's got problems, but she's not possessed. I mean, she needs love and care, and that's where that psychologist had to dig into her background and say, what traumatized her? This is the way she's responding.
And that's the vast majority, but then there are these other rare instances.
Right. And it's interesting because exorcisms in the United States are very rare, very, very rare. But when you start getting into areas and countries where there's a lot lower education, there seems to be a correlation between the thoughts of possession and lack of education. For example, we have we do a lot of ministry in Haiti. A lot of our Catholic churches do a lot of Haitian ministry. Well, exorcisms there are not uncommon. And now, I haven't done a lot of reading, I haven't witnessed it myself, but in a country that has very little mental care and virtually no mental health care, are we looking at epilepsy? Are we looking at other problems? That I don't know. But where there's still in places where there's still a lot of superstition, in areas where voodoo is practiced, which is kind of a really warped out adoption of Catholicism with some other native cultures, or in tribal societies where there are a lot of they might have become Christian, but they believe in all the gods of nature and all this stuff. So you see it a lot more in those kinds of places.
Fascinating. All right, we've gone longer than we should on first segment. Sorry. I'm fascinated by it. Thank you, Father. All right, we're going to take a break. If you want to call in, there's a number, 615-737-PLUS. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.